Throughout the history of mankind, wolves have been a nearly omnipresent force, which started out as a fierce and deadly rival competing against humanity at every step for food, until the Council of Man and Canine came to an agreement that by working together, they could obtain more food than they ever could individually. And as an added bonus, this domestication would lead to the development of objectively the best life forms on this planet. So it's unsurprising that dogs and cats have had a lot of representation in world mythology, with some cultures rightfully worshipping them as sacred animals, and others going further to anthropomorphize them as gods. However, this development exclusively came from wolves who were genetically much more passive than their ilk, and hence would actually associate themselves with humanity. The rest of them, however, have had a much more sordid history, which primarily came about due to the development of agriculture and the subsequent need to protect livestock from predators. From the Middle Ages onward, hunting wolves was an encouraged activity amongst European farmers, and due to the lack of wildlife regulations at this time, the last of the European grey wolves was thought to have been killed in 1899. Thankfully, at least a handful survived and were able to flee into Poland, where they were able to reinvigorate their populations and then come back to pester, primarily, German farmers, who have been contesting the German parliament for decades now to allow for more lackadaisical hunting laws, which were implemented ironically during Nazi-era Germany. Similarly, wolves get a pretty bad rep in mythology as well, with the most prominent example being Fenrir, or as he is more commonly known, Fenrir, which in Old Nordic literally means fen dweller. And what is a fen, you may be asking? Well, according to Wikipedia,
a fen is one of the main types of wetlands, the others being grassy marshes, forested swamps, and peaty bogs. Along with bogs, fens are a kind of mire. Fens are minor trophic peatlands, usually fed by mineral-rich surface water or groundwater. They are characterized by their distinct water chemistry, which is pH neutral or alkaline, with relatively high dissolved mineral levels but few other plant nutrients.
Yeah, I only understood about half of that myself too. What you need to know about Fenrir's name is that the rear, meaning dweller, does not particularly apply to Fenrisulfur, as his more traditional name translates to Fenrir's wolf, with the Fenrir in question more than likely applying to either one of his two parents. However, because I am 90% positive I am butchering the pronunciation of Fenrisulfur, and for iconography's sake, I will continue to refer to him simply as Fenrir, despite the fact that he has two other, much cooler yet equally as hard to pronounce names in the form of Vanagandir, monster of the river Van, and Horoldvitnir, which means a famous wolf. Whatever the fuck you want to call him, was the final child of Loki and his giantess mistress Angerboda. And yes, I am pronouncing that correctly, I checked. And while he doesn't hold the same distinctive honors as his sister Hel as the ruler of an entire realm, nor does he have the stature and lore of his brother Jormungandr, Odin knew what was up the moment he discovered the siblings in Angerboda's cave, and instead of banishing him to another dimension or tossing him over the walls of Asgard, Fenrir was actually raised directly in the home of the gods, all so that Odin could keep his one singular eye on him. However, Odin evidently didn't do a very good job. Actually, scratch that, Odin didn't do jack shit, because Fenrir would oftentimes sneak out and bump uglies with some unnamed giantess who lives in the Ironwood Forest, who can be best described as the fosterer of Fenrir's children, who are all wolves. However, we will only pay attention to two of these sons, Skoll and Hati Hroldvitsen, whose names roughly translate to treachery and he who hates, respectively. These two wolves actually have a role to play later on in the mythology, but we'll be getting to that a little bit later in this video. Anyway, back to whatchamacallem, the werewolf. Growing up amidst the Aesir was hard for poor Fenrir, as all the people he had ever had to take care of him looked at him like he was some sort of unholy love child between a blue giant and a metrosexual god of trickery. Or something like that. Most of the gods were too afraid to even feed the giant wolf, with one exception. The Jotun-turned god and sometimes occasionally god of war, Tyr. Tyr is kind of like the cool uncle of Norse mythology, and inarguably the bravest among the gods, as it is stated that he was the only one to ever confront Fenrir when it was feeding time. Some sources I've seen claim that Tyr and Fenrir actually developed a friendship from this relationship, while others have said that they were cautious acquaintances at best. I personally believe the former because of the tale we're about to get into. And yes, of course I am talking about that story. So as Fenrir grows larger and more powerful, the Aesir begin to devise a plan to keep the King Bradley of wolves over here from running amok and devouring all of them. So they retired to their forges, creating a chain worthy of the gods, one which they believed no living creature could ever break out of. Fenrir thought it was cute and willingly let the Aesir tie him down with it, only for him to flex once and shatter it into 1,000 pieces. And so the gods converged again, this time devoting all of their engineering knowledge and working day and night to craft a chain far stronger than even the first one they were sure Fenrir would never be able to break out of. Until he did. Rather easily at that. So now the Aesir were boned unless they could somehow outdo themselves once again and create a truly unbreakable chain. However, like an impatient father who's decided he had, quote, better things to do with his time, they just contracted out the construction of the third chain to the dwarves, the finest craftsmen in all 9 realms, who created such objects as Baldur's magic ship, Odin's mighty spear, and perhaps most famously, Thor's indomitable hammer, Mjolnir. And so, with the idea that failure meant Ragnarok coming early, the dwarves set to work fashioning a chain out of all sorts of nonsensical materials, such as a cat's footsteps, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, and the breath of a fish. This somehow resulted in a silken chain which was soft and twistable, yet stronger than any other material ever conceived. When the Aesir presented this seemingly innocuous-looking chain to the monster Fenrir, however, he refused to take the challenge. Fenrir was actually smart enough to know that the Aesir were trying to trick him with a cursed chain of unforetold strength, and really wasn't having any of it, even at the goading of the gods, calling him a coward or a weakling, all while they collectively knew that he could kill every single one of them at any given moment. Finally, Fenrir relented and agreed to the challenge on the condition that one of them had to stick their right arm into his open maw so that if the chain were to hold him, he would get to devour one of their arms in return. All of the gods just looked at each other, one by one, not a single one of them brave enough to take on the challenge. Except for Tyr the Badass, who gladly offered his right arm to the beast. With both parties sticking to their word, Fenrir was bound by the Aesir, and almost immediately it became clear that he was never going to break that chain. And while Fenrir struggled to free himself, Tyr kept his arm inside the wolf's jaw up until the moment Fenrir clamped his teeth down around it. Now some say that Tyr kept his arm in there to stay true to his word. Others claim that he just never had enough time to get out of the way. I say that his balls were so big and they weighed him down so that escape was never a possibility in the first place. However, it's the fact that Fenrir actually trusted Tyr enough to actually go through with the challenge after he called what we can only assume to be Fenrir's bluff that really cements that these two actually were a lot more closer than some sources lead on. Then again, that's entirely speculation on both my part and everybody else's, but you can take that information and do with it as you please. Just don't make any more fucking furry porn. Nevertheless, the Aesir had won. For the cost of Tyr's fapping arm, they had secured the doomsday monster until the end of time, driving a sword down through his snout for good measure before sealing the other end of the chain to a massive rock buried deep below the surface of the earth. And so never again would a giant wolf ever threaten the existence of the gods. Until Skoll and Hati finally came around to devour the sun and the moon, immediately kicking off Ragnarok season by staining the sky red with blood. Yeah, this doesn't end well for anyone. After his sons had successfully devoured the celestial bodies, the earth began to violently shake. for some reason, loosening Fenrir's binding to the rock at the center of the planet and setting the tremendous monster free so that he may take part in the Battle of the Grid. Upon sighting a very pissed off Fenrir, Odin charges towards him, brandishing his magical spear, utilizing his 8-legged horse's might to deliver one final killing blow and finish what he started all those centuries ago when he found the children of Loki. And then Fenrir ate him. Yeah, he didn't even take this fight to a draw. Fenrir straight up devoured the most powerful of the Nordic gods instantaneously, and by this point there really wasn't anybody left who could possibly defeat him. Thor was already dead due to Jormungandr's corrosive breath, Heimdall and Loki killed each other, and Freyr supposedly didn't have his good sword with him, so Surtur killed him as well. And even mighty Tyr got eaten by a different dog earlier on in the battle. So that's it then. The entire world is on fire, and Fenrir is just going to go around devouring everything in his wake, thus crippling any chance of a return for the gods? Jesus, I wish. Following what was possibly one of the coolest scenes in all of Norse mythology with Odin getting eaten, we have the stupidest thing I have ever read. Outside of Twitter. So there was this one god named Vioarr, who is totally unremarkable aside from this singular instance, who puts on a magic shoe and kicks Fenrir really hard with it. And then tears his mouth apart, and that kills him. However, it was very clear that it was the magical Deus Ex Machina shoe which did all the legwork. Pun entirely intended. What the fuck, Snoori? You just can't bring back the fire-breathing embodiment of hatred who had to be sealed with a magical bullshit plot device just so that he could kill Odin with a single bite, then do him in with an equally bullshit magical plot device, and call that the least bit satisfying of a conclusion. Fenrir just fucks off and dies, while Shoe Man over here gets to survive Ragnarok with a handful of his buddies and then recreate the world as they see fit. I'd hate to be that guy, but the Eddas are really, really dumb sometimes, and I definitely have a love-hate relationship with them. As without them, we would get these really cool stories of larger-than-life gods fighting off ravenous monsters, getting drunk, passing out, and then waking up to do it again, but it would certainly be incomplete and leave a lot of context completely lost to history. But then you get shit like this. Speaking of losing things to history and religious revisionism, I think I've got my next 2 videos pretty much figured out for the next time. But if you guys would like to leave your suggestions for whatever mythological character, story, or monster I should cover next, I would definitely appreciate that. Also, thank you to everyone who has supported the channel up to this point. I have all of you to thank for getting me to 300 subscribers, and here's hoping that we can maybe go even further than that in the near future. Until then, my name is Messiahs in Mythology, and I still haven't come up with a catchy outro, so here just have a teaser trailer for what's coming up next.